In the game Catan, players construct settlements and grow cities on an uninhabited island by gathering resources from the places selected by the roll of the dice. Players can earn points by taking various actions, such as building a settlement for 1 point or having the longest road for 2 points. The first player to reach 10 points wins the game. Set up the playing field. First, assemble the outer frame. You have to place numbers on the frame to confirm and assemble the frame for the map. Shuffle the hexes and place them vertically starting from the number 1 on the frame to create the map. After placing the hexes vertically along the frame, continue to place them in a zigzag pattern, alternating between the left and right columns. Next, starting from the number 1 on the outer frame, place the number tokens in a clockwise spiral, following alphabetical order. Turn all terrain hexes over so that the number side faces up and the map is complete. Check the number of resource cards and development cards, and then set them up. Each player receives their playing piece. I'll leave the robber in the desert. Roll 2 dice to determine the order, based on the total number rolled. Once the order is established, starting with the first player, each player places 1 settlement and 1 road in any desired location, in a clockwise direction. You can place a settlement on the corner of any hexagonal tile, and a road along any edge of a hexagonal tile. One important rule is that settlements cannot be placed adjacent to each other. They must be separated by at least 1 space. This applies not only to your own pieces but also to those of your opponents. After placing a settlement, you must place a road on an edge adjacent to the settlement to connect it to the rest of your road network. Once the placement is completed for the first 4 players, starting with the 4th player, and proceeding in reverse order, each player places a second settlement and a second road. That means the 4th player can place their second settlement and road immediately. Once the second settlement is placed, the player collects 1 resource card from each adjacent tile that is touching the second settlement. There are 5 types of resources: lumber, wool, ore, brick, and grain. These resources are used as materials for construction and development. The type of resource that can be collected depends on the image depicted on the tile. And with that, the initial setup is complete. There are 3 types of pieces: settlements, cities, and roads. Building a settlement earns 1 point upon placement. As 2 settlements are placed at the beginning of the game, each player starts with 2 points. You need at least 2 roads connecting the current city and the new one you wish to construct before you can place the next city. In addition, there are number tokens placed on the hexagons, which represent the numbers on a dice. If a player's settlement is adjacent to a hexagon with the number rolled on the dice, the player can collect 1 resource from that hexagon. A player may take 1 resource from a hex if their city is close to the one whose number corresponds to the dice's throw. A player can gather 1 resource for each nearby hex if their city is close to many hexes with the same number. When a player places a city, they receive 2 points. And the number of resources collected doubles to 2 per adjacent hex with a number token on it. A city is not built, but is considered an upgrade, and cannot be built without a settlement. When you upgrade to a city, you replace that settlement piece with a city piece. That settlement piece returns to your hand. The initial setup is very important to win this game. Take your time to decide how you go. For beginners, it is recommended to start by placing their settlements where they can collect resources evenly. Players build settlements and cities to earn points, and the first player to reach 10 points wins the game. On their turn, players roll the dice first. The way the dice roll affects how the turn proceeds. The player will check the number token that has been placed on the board. If the dice result is anything other than a 7, the owner of that piece will gather resources if a city or settlement is close by the space with the same number as the roll. If there is a city or settlement adjacent to the space with the same number as the roll, any player who owns a piece on that space can collect resources, not just the player whose turn it is. If there is no piece on that space, no resources can be collected. If there is a city adjacent to the space, the owner of the city can collect 2 resources of the corresponding type for each adjacent space with the same number. If there is a settlement adjacent to the space, the owner of the settlement can collect 1 resource of the corresponding type for each adjacent space with the same number. If there are not enough resources to distribute among all eligible players, then no one can collect the resources. If the roll of the dice is a 7, all players, including the player whose turn it is, must first check the number of resource cards they have. If any player has 8 or more resource cards, they are in a state of overproduction or burst and must discard half of their resource cards, rounded down. The player can choose which cards to discard. If the number of cards to be discarded is odd, the player must round down to the nearest integer. For example, if a player has 9 cards, they must discard 4 cards. After the overproduction is resolved, the player whose turn it is may place the robber on a different square of their choosing from the one it is currently on. The robber cannot be placed in the same space twice in a row. While the robber is on a tile, no resources can be collected from that tile. If there is a city or settlement belonging to another player adjacent to the space where the robber is placed, the owner of the city or settlement can discard a random resource card from their hand if they have any. This represents the robber stealing a resource from that player's settlement or city. If there are multiple adjacent settlements or cities, the player whose turn it is must choose one of them and randomly take 1 resource card from that player's hand. Only 1 resource card can be taken from one player, even if they have multiple adjacent settlements or cities. No resources can be taken from other players who have adjacent settlements or cities in the same space. After rolling the dice and resolving its effects, you can take the following 3 actions. You can do how many times you want, except for using a development card. Construction or purchase development cards, trade cards, and use development cards. Construction or purchase development cards. If you have the necessary resources, you can place settlements or roads, upgrade settlements to cities, or purchase development cards. Please refer to the cost chart for the required resources for each action. A city is not built, but is considered an upgrade, and cannot be upgraded without a settlement. When you upgrade to a city, you replace that settlement piece with a city piece. That settlement piece returns to your hand. If you have purchased a development card, you cannot use it immediately, so please place it face down on the table so that everyone can see it. Trade cards. You can trade cards with other players or with the bank during the game. If you make a deal with another player, you can choose the exchange rate and the cards you want to exchange freely. However, you cannot exchange cards with other players on their turns. If you have 4 of the same resource cards, you can exchange one of them with the bank for any other resource card you choose. If you have acquired a harbor, you can exchange resources more efficiently with fewer cards. Harbors are obtained by building a settlement on a coastal intersection where a harbor symbol is displayed on the border of the game board. The harbor has either 3:1 or 2:1 ratio of exchange printed on it. 3:1 means that you can exchange 3 of the same resource cards for one of any other resource cards, while 2:1 means that you can exchange 2 of the specific resource cards shown on the harbor for one of any other resource cards. Using development cards. You can use the purchased development cards during your turn before rolling the dice, or at any other time during your turn. However, you can only use one development card per turn. Also, you cannot use a development card immediately after purchasing it on the same turn. The effect of a development card is as written on the card. However, victory points are a bit special in that they have an impact just by holding them, and you keep them hidden until the end of the game. For example, if the current total points are 8 and you have 2 hidden victory point cards, you would have 10 points, and you can reveal the victory point cards to declare victory. There are 5 types of development cards: Knight, Road Building, Development, Monopoly, and Victory Point. To summarize what you can do on your turn. Largest army, and longest road. In addition to gaining points by acquiring settlements, cities, and victory point cards, there are 2 other ways to earn points: largest army and longest road. The largest army is awarded to the player who first plays 3 knight development cards, giving them 2 points towards their largest army. On the other hand, the longest road is earned by the player who has built a continuous road of at least 5 segments in length. Roads can run through one's own settlements and cities, but must be a continuous path with no branching. If the opponent's settlement or city is located, the road is considered to be cut off. Both largest army and longest road can be reclaimed if the number of knights and roads in a single stroke exceed the opponent's. Therefore, to acquire and escape, you need to increase the number of knights and roads. It is still safe when both are caught up to the same number. The game ends when a player reaches a total of 10 points from cities, settlements, development cards, and the longest road and declares victory on their turn. Be careful, as a victory declaration can only be made on your own turn.